Hello, this is a video for COMP345, Advanced Program Design with C++. This is for week 1. In this video, I'm going to be presenting the description of the project. So this is a brief description of the project. More details will come in each of the assignments. This is just an overall description of the project and what it is and overall how the program should be functioning. Again, you will have much more details later. Okay, let me share the screen. There you go. So you see this is a 2-page description, very brief. So let me go through this here. So as I discussed in the first lecture, the project is to be done in teams of 5. It's divided in 3 assignments. This is just a description of the overall project. For each of the different assignments, you will have a similar page description that will detail in particular for each of the assignments what exactly you have to do. Okay. You should not start doing everything before you have working on everything before you have the description of assignment number 1. Assignment number 1 is going to be just a subset of what you have to do. In assignment number 2, I'm going to ask you to add upon what you had to do for assignment number 1, so on and so forth. So it's essentially incremental development that you're going to be doing, and that's the description of the overall project. Now, what is the problem statement? So this is going to be a computer game. I very often use computer games as projects. There are different reasons for this. First of all, because there are predefined rules for a game. You can find resources that define the rules of the game. I'm doing my best here to describe you all the rules, but there are some resources online that you can find. So in particular, in this case, this is a variant of the board game Risk, which is essentially a game where you have a map, normally of the world, but not necessarily, where the objective is to control the entire map of the world, at which point you win the game. This is here to implement a variant of Risk that is called Warzone. So here's a link to a website that actually provides you with an already existing implementation of the game Warzone. Very important to understand that what I'm asking you to do here is not to duplicate the entirety of the game Warzone that you will find online. For example, there will be no graphical user interface to our game. So it's all going to be only text, keyboard text interactions with the user. Okay. So no graphical user interface. This is not part of the mandate of this course. And for those of you who know how to do graphical user interfaces in C++, it could be an entire course in itself. Right? That's not a mandate of the game, of the course. Here, what we will do is I use this game as a topic to actually ask you to implement the rules of the game and the mechanics of the game, not the rendering of the game. Okay. Very important to understand that from the start. So what is this game? So you'll see here, first of all, that there are some terminology that I'm using in the project description. I'm trying to be very consistent in my use of terminology, I'm trying to use exact terms that have a exact definition. So it's important, as for any computer project or programming project, you are faced with a problem. The first thing that you have to do is to make sure that you understand what are all the terms, the terminology that is used in this project description. For example, you might be developing a new piece of software for a bank. Your first job is to understand what are the terms involved by in this bank. What are the different transactions and so on. For everything that you will need to implement for this bank, you've got to be able to understand what the people are telling you to implement. Okay? That's the first thing. You have to read this and make sure that you really understand what this is saying. Okay. For example, here, well, first of all, I'm not going to explain everything in this video. Okay. As we go, I'm going to explain more and more. So just for one example of what I was saying, for example, saying here, Warzone game setup consists of a connected graph map. So right here, right off the bat, I'm using a notion of connected graph. So this term is very precise. You have to know what is a connected graph if you want to know what this phrase means, if this what this sentence means. So connected graph is like the graph that is behind me here. If I can stop sharing. So this is an example of a connected graph. This is also an example of a map that you may use to implement the game. The game is going to be made so that you can actually run the game on any connected graph, not one specific one, such as, for example, the Risk game map is a very specific kind of connected graph. In the project, you will have to implement the game so that you can run the game on any connected graph. So in this case, for example, each of the nodes in the graph represent territories, okay? And then each of the arrows or the edges between the nodes represents adjacency between the territories. So for example, territory 1 is adjacent to territory 2, and territory 1 is also adjacent to territory 2. So you see that it's not only a graph, it's a directed graph. Very precise meaning to these terms here. So yes, you have nodes corresponds to territories, you have edges that corresponds to adjacency between territories, and there is a direction to these edges. So for example, here, what that means is that eventually you're going to have to move, there's going to be armies on these territories, and you're going to somehow have to move your armies from one territory to another. You will be only able to move armies from one territory to another if there is an edge that goes in this direction towards the target of your move. Okay. For example, you will be able to move armies from 3 to 6, but not from 6 to 3. Okay. So this is a connected graph. You've seen that before, probably in 335, COMP345. So that's basically going to be an application of what you saw in this other course. Okay, so let's go back to project description. So the map is a connected graph. So then 2 or more players can play by placing armies on countries they own or territories that they own. So there are players involved, and the players, what a player is somebody that actually owns some of the countries that are the territories that are on the map. And then this player is able to either place armies on their own territories or move armies basically by using what we will see later as orders. So the player is able to create orders, to issue orders in order to move armies, create an attack, and other things which we will see briefly later. So the players will own countries on the map, divided randomly at the beginning of the game, and then they will place armies on their territories, and then they will basically try to conquer some of the territories by doing battles between the territories they own and territories that another player owns to conquer these territories until one of the players has conquered all the territories, at which point the game ends and this player has won the game. Okay. Okay, so for the map, I already described pretty well what the map is. The map is a connected graph. And as you saw on my example on the board, there are also continents. So a continent is basically a group of territories, basically a subgraph of the graph. The goal of the territories is that, every time the turn will start, because this is a turn-based game, every time that a turn will start, a player will get a certain number of armies. If a player controls an entire, all the territories that belong to an entire continent, then they will get more armies. So the object, the goal, the role of the continents is that if you control them, you will get more armies at every turn. Okay. One of the constraints of what is a continent is that a continent must be a connected subgraph of the map. We will discuss that later. Maybe if you have some questions in the lecture, go ahead, we can discuss that. For sure, we were going to discuss that later in the lecture. Okay, so again, I'm not gonna go and explain everything here, just gonna fly over the description, just so that you have a good idea of what we're talking about. Okay, so the game is going to be divided into phases. So the first phase is going to be the startup phase. So when you start the game, you're in the startup phase, and then what happens is that the number of players is determined by the user, and after this is done, then all the territories that are on the map are divided somehow equally between the players. Then once this is done, this is the end of the startup phase, and then you go to what is called the main playing phase, which consists of the reinforcement phase, the orders issuing phase, and the orders execution phase, as we see here. So there's a loop that goes between reinforcement, issue ordering, and execution. And then it goes back to enforcement, issue ordering, order issuing, and then order execution. So it goes like this until during this cycle, one of the players will eventually control all the map, at which point it will actually go to the end phase that is described here. Okay, so once you go to the reinforcement phase, as I said earlier, every turn, the players will get new armies that they will be able to place on the map, on the territories that they control on the map. So there's a certain formula that you will apply to determine how many armies a player will get at every of their reinforcement phase. Basically, every turn, player gets a number of armies, and they will be able to use orders to place their reinforcement armies on the map. That's for the reinforcement phase. And then there's the, once this has been done, every player has been given all their armies for this turn, then you go to the orders issuing phase. So there's one concept here that if you know the game risk, that differs from the game risk by having this notion of order. So if you know risk, don't assume that this is exactly the same as risk. You'll be confused. Okay, it's a variation of risk, but it's not exactly the same. So the order issuing phase. So essentially, what happens here is that in round robin fashion, the players will be asked to create an order. The orders are defined below, and I will come back to that later. So, once a player is being asked, what is your order? They can either create an order or say, I don't have any more order, in which case it's going to be the next player's turn to issue orders. And then this player will not be part of the round robin anymore, which makes it so that if once all the players have said, no, I don't have any more orders, the order issuing phase is going to finish, and then we'll go to the order execution phase. So the objective of this phase is to accumulate orders that are given by each of the players. Note that at this point, the orders are not executed. The players just issue orders. It's basically saying, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, but it's not executed at this point. Okay. That's one main difference between Warzone and Risk. So what are the orders? So here, what I'm describing here is what are all the orders? Very roughly what it does, but more importantly here, it describes what are the parameters of these orders. Basically, when you create a deploy order, the objective of the deploy order or the effect of the deploy order is to put a certain number of army units on a target territory. So again, I repeat, when you create the order, it does not actually put the armies on the territory. All you do when you create the order is to specify what number of army units you want to deploy and on what target territory. Okay. The effect is described in more details here in the order's execution phase. Here it basically describes what are the parameters of these orders. An advance order is about moving a certain number of army units from one territory, the source territory, to another territory, the target territory. You see here that this one has 3 parameters. When you say, I want to create an advance order, you must say how many armies are moved from where to where. That's how you create an advance order. That's the order issuing phase. Note that at this point, you don't even verify whether or not the order is valid. Okay, you just provide a number of army to be moved from where to where. It doesn't verify anything. The verification is it's going to be only done during the execution. The bomb order destroys half of the army units located on a target territory. So here there's only one parameter, which is the target territory. The blockade order triples the number of army units on a target territory and makes it a neutral territory. These are the bomb, the blockade, the airlift, and the negotiate. They all require a card, because there's also cards in this game. So in order to, the only orders that don't require a card are deploy and advance. Bomb, blockade, airlift, and negotiate all require a card. Now going back to the list, airlift advances a certain number of army units from one territory to another territory. Again, you need to have the airlift card to be able to create this order. The negotiate order prevents attacks between the current player and another target player. So when you create the negotiate order, you must specify what player is the target of this order. So here, basically, this list is only to tell you what are the parameters that you must specify when you issue the order. So every player goes in round-robin fashion and creates one such order, or says, I don't have any more order, until nobody has any more orders, in which case it goes to the order's execution phase. Now, in this phase, what's going to happen is that the game engine is going to go ask every player, give me one of your orders in round-robin fashion. So, and every time it will receive one order from the player, it will execute this order. The execution of the order will actually implement the effect of the order. For example, if you execute a deploy order, you will effectively move a certain number of army units from the current player's reinforcement pool to one of the current player's territories. So you see that it gives much more details here. So for example, it says here that the armies come from the reinforcement pool. What is the reinforcement pool? If you remember when we said about reinforcement, what happens is that you receive a certain number of armies during reinforcement and they are placed in the reinforcement pool. When you then apply a deploy order, then you will move these armies from the reinforcement pool and then put them in on one of the territories owned by this player. So essentially here, this is describing what is the effect of the orders when you execute them. By far, the most complex and important order in the game is the advance order. This is essentially when you start moving armies to other territories. One of the things that's going to happen is that if you move armies from one of your territories to a territory that does not belong to you, it's basically signifying that you want to attack this territory and you want to conquer this territory. In which case, if you do, then that makes you go one step further in winning the game, the objective being to conquer all the territories. So it's only by creating advance orders that you can win the game. If you never do any advance order, you cannot win the game. So I will not explain this one here in detail. I'll let you read this, and we will extensively talk about this during class time. So essentially, just to fly over this, so you will specify how many armies you want to move from one of your territories to another territory. You can't do an advance from one of your territory to another of your territory. If that's the case, then it will only take these armies and automatically move them to your other territory because it belongs to you also. If the target does not, there's a source and the target, if the target territory does not belong to you, then there's going to be a battle. And there's a simulation of a battle that's going to happen. And then if the result of this battle is that all the army units on the target territory that you were attacking have been destroyed, then you basically have conquered this territory and you will move the remaining armies that you have involved in the battle into this territory that you just conquered. Okay. And you'll be said to have conquered a territory. And another important effect of having conquered a territory, aside from being a step further in winning the game, is that every of your turns, if you have conquered at least one territory, you will get a card, which will allow you to create one of these orders that I described before, which are giving you an edge in further winning the game and more easily winning the game further. So the more you conquer, the more you get cards, the more you can have more powerful effects to conquer more. Okay, so important to note that every turn you can earn either 0 or 1 card. You get 1 card only if you have conquered at least one territory during your turn. You don't get 1 card for every territory you conquer. After you finish your turn, if you are you have conquered a territory during this turn, you will receive 1 card. If you did not conquer any territory during your turn, you will receive 0 card. The bomb and the airlift and the negotiate, they all require a card in order to create them. The bomb, as I mentioned earlier, will destroy half of the army units located into an opponent territory that is adjacent to one of your current players, of one of the current players' territories. So you see here that I'm giving some more details as to what is a valid, for example, bomb order. So yes, you target a territory with a bomb order, but here it says specifically that this territory that you target must be adjacent to one of your territories. Okay. So when you create the order, as I described here, the description only says you just target a territory. That's how you create an order, a bomb order. You target a territory, you say, I want to bomb this territory. When you will later execute the order, it will check whether the bomb is valid. The bomb order is valid. How is it valid? It is only valid if the bomb order targets a territory that is adjacent to one of the territory that belongs to the player that created this order, that now wants to execute this order. The blockade order triples the number of army units on one of the current player's territories and makes it a neutral territory. So basically, when you create a blockade, you create a lot of armies in one place in the map, but this territory does not belong to you anymore. Okay. So that's a way for you to create a blockade. So somewhere in the map, if there's a bottleneck in the map and you create a blockade there, it's going to make it very hard for the enemy to traverse, to conquer this country and then come to you. So essentially, you want to create a blockade in an important bottleneck in the map, so it's as to make sure that you protect what is on this side from the enemy that's on the other side. It's basically a protection kind of order. Airlift. The airlift, essentially what it is an advance order that does not have any restriction as to what is the source and the target. When you create an advance order, the source territory must be one of your territories, and the target territory must be one of the adjacent territories of the source territory. You see that the language I'm using here is very precise. I would even suspect that some people are lost in the terminology that I'm using. I'm trying to be as precise in the terminology that I'm using, and that's what you should do also when you discuss with team members. You should learn the terminology so that when you discuss with other people in your team, discuss about the implementation and the design and so on, that you use correct terms so as to make sure that you have clear communication, that everybody understands what everybody is talking about because everybody is using proper language. Okay, so essentially the airlift is an advance, but where it doesn't matter whether the source territory is adjacent to the target territory. The idea is that essentially airlift, the word says it, use an airplane to launch an attack. So you can start here and you can go anywhere on the map and then attack anywhere. Or move for that matter. Does not necessarily need to be an attack. And then there's the negotiate order that this order prevents a certain player, prevents attacks from happening between the current player that or issued this order and the target player. So if you target another player, you cannot attack this player anymore, and this player cannot attack you anymore until the end of this turn. Then finally, so then the game engine will take every order. Let's say it has 3 players, will take an order from player 1, take the order, execute the order. Then go to player 2, take an order, execute the order. Player 3, take the order, execute the order. Go back to player 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, until there's no more orders. In which case, it will actually go back to the reinforcement phase. Then the players will be given more armies. then they will be given the opportunity to issue orders. Once everybody does not have any more orders anymore, then the order will be executed. The orders are executed. Once there are not any more orders, you go back to reinforcement, and so on and so forth. Okay. During this whole main phase, if ever, well, first of all, if a player does not control any territory, then the player will be out of the game. Okay, a player that does not control any territory does not participate in this game anymore. If ever in the game there remains only one player, the player that controls all the map, then this player will be the winner. In terms of the mechanics of the game, if there's ever only one player in the game, the game engine will go to the end phase. And during the end phase, and player that won the game is announced, and some statistics are about the game are displayed. Then the user is asked whether they want to play another game. If they say yes, then you go back to the startup phase. If they say no, then the program stops. Okay. So this is what we will implement. I remind you here, this only thing I'm going to ask you to implement is the rules and the mechanics of the game. You don't have to implement any graphical user interface. Some students already know how to do that, and they may implement like a crude window that with some fields that allow more easily to implement the mechanics of the game, but you don't have to. Okay, zero graphical user interface is assumed. You will not receive more grades if you do a GUI, and you will not have less grades if you don't. Okay, you are allowed to implement a GUI if you want, but that's not part of the grading, and you will not have bonus if you do it. Okay, so that's about it for this. That's about it for this. So please, the first thing that you have to do is, well, first of all, create a team and read this extensively, this project description extensively. Write down some questions if you have, and come to class and ask questions. It may seem that what I said is complete, but I tell you, there are a lot of things that I didn't say, or there are a lot of things that I said that you may feel after thinking about it that it's actually ambiguous, and that there's some things that I did not specify. There is some things that I did not say. Don't worry about it. That's part actually of the project. You know, that's always what happens when you develop software. Somebody asks you to do software that solves problem X. There's always some questions to be asked. Many of these questions in real life, even maybe the person that asks you to develop a piece of software, you may ask them questions that they did not ask themselves yet. Okay, that's what should be happening as you are developing software. You ask as many questions as possible before you start, because if you don't ask these questions before you start, you will write some code according to what you think you know, and then you will uncover some questions. And unfortunately, the answer to these questions might make it so that the lines of code that you wrote are going to be wrong according to the answer that you will get to this new question. So that's why it's always better before you start to gather as much information as possible, so that you are very confident before you start writing code that you have all the information. There's inevitably always some questions that come as you do the programming, but you want to, be as confident as possible that you have most of the information before you start. So that's it for this video. Thank you.